So at this time, I believe that AI has helped us solve the problem of ad fatigue on platforms like Facebook. Here's what I mean by that. So if we look to simplify the way we categorize our communication to consumers in our ad creatives and ad accounts, Alfred and I like to boil it down to three simple categories. There's people who are not in market. There's people who are curious about either our product in particular or our category of product. And there's people who are seriously considering your product or a competing product, and they're balancing the pros and cons between you and the rest of the competition. And where ad fatigue tends to kick in is when brands over-index on communication to just one layer of this triangle, where let's say all communication presumes that people are already serious about buying their product. And we're neglecting other parts of the market who would be a great fit for your product, but we're just not speaking to them yet in a way that appeals to them to become curious and serious. And if ads are focused on only or this layer, the challenge is that we're not getting people who are not in the market right now to flow through in order to be receptive of the messaging that is appropriate in the curious and serious layers. So if we want to win the war against ad fatigue, what we need is diverse enough messaging and ad ideas that appeal all the way through. And in our experience, these two categories of curious and serious are actually the two that most people don't have any trouble coming up with ads for. And here are some examples of what I mean by that. So the most straightforward ads, like mentioning your guarantee or your offer with 85 euros off, or your offer with buy more, save more, or even the launch of a new product or collection, is something that most brands don't actually struggle with too much and can create a meaningful amount of volume when it comes to this type of messaging. However, when it comes to this layer over here, for people who aren't necessarily in market for your product or your category of product, I find that's where people we work with struggle the most, and even myself included. But as you can see in this funnel or upside down triangle, is this layer here is actually thicker and it has more room than these ones down here because they represent the potential for reaching more of your addressable market. And the reason why I think creating messaging and ad creatives and visuals, whether it's in the form of video or imagery, is more challenging is because we have biases on what we think will and will not work. Here's an example of what I mean by that. So I'm working through a new prompt that helps me and our members with coming up with virtually limitless ad ideas to fill our ad accounts with. And as I'm going through the outputs of the prompt, what I'm noticing is I am seeing ad ideas that I would never think of previously, and I would generally write off as being either too simplistic or not enough. And for me, my bias of what's enough means having a fair amount of copy when it comes to what goes inside of the ads. But I'm proven wrong time and time again when I look inside of ad accounts that we have access to or that we're working inside of. And I see things that I would subjectively and prematurely say would never work, which would unfortunately be leaving lots of opportunity on the table. And the wonderful thing about AI is that now it gives us the ability to come up with ideas, or at least stumble upon ideas that we would never come across because of our own biases. In this case, what I've told ChatGPT I wanted was ideas based on different stages of awareness that we just talked about. So not in market, curious, and serious, dividing things up in this fashion. And then based on each stage of awareness, the different motivators that people would be motivated by and the respective internal emotional messages that consumers may be having on the inside that might be unspoken. And by telling it that we want it structured this way, it comes up with ideas that can appeal to these motivators and emotions and give me ideas that I would never have thought of before, so that my ad account can be filled with things that are completely diverse, completely different, and can combat ad fatigue. And just for context, this is a brand that I've been following, and I was just using them as a practice run for the prompt. And the reason why I like doing it is because they sell a product that is very commoditized, which is printed designs on t-shirts. And when I took off the filter of subjectively judging these ad ideas, and I looked more across the rationales of the ideas along with the internal messaging and the motivator that we're trying to appeal to with these ideas, or rather what ChatGPT is trying to appeal to, I can start to understand how these can appeal to each of the motivators, stage of awareness, and internal emotional message. And if I scroll up a little bit, I can actually see where ChatGPT explained the rationale for each selection. So in this case, for those who are not in market, they chose two motivators of belonging and security to appeal to. And the rationale was belonging connects with people who aren't actively shopping, but resonate with community and identity. And security gives them comfort in chaotic times, subtly introducing the brand as a source of peace and stability. And what I love about this is that if I was working with this brand, I personally would not have been able to see these connections because of my bias towards coming up with advertising that tends to be a little bit more left brain, fact-based, and logic-driven, which works at certain stages of the funnel, but doesn't work as well when you're trying to appeal to people who you haven't communicated with before, and you want to open up communication to with different styles and different messaging. And so because AI is so good at coming up with ideas for us that are outside our sphere of biases, it presents a wonderful opportunity because the execution of ideas is usually not our biggest limitation. I think of it kind of like basketball. When you don't really have a net or a target to shoot for, it can be hard to hit what you need to hit and to achieve the goals that you're after. But when you have a target to go after, all of a sudden you can start working towards shooting it into the right place. So the execution of making the shots is actually the more straightforward part. It's having the target and the actual thing that you're aiming for that is a critical part of the process. So the parallel is that if you have ideas that you can create, then shooting the ball is actually not a problem. Where you need to shoot, you have the execution power for it. In the case of making ads, the execution power is designers, video editors, creators who are available and accessible for all of us. The challenge in fighting the ad creative problem, or rather the ad fatigue problem, is having enough ideas to actually execute towards. Because when you do, then it's no longer a problem. You can have lots of execution happening towards the goal. So ad fatigue is no longer a problem because ad ideas used to be the problem, but because of AI, getting ad ideas is no longer a challenge or an issue, but rather utilizing AI and taking advantage of it is.